Hello and welcome back to D3D12Ez here on the Ludwig Fusel channel. Now in this video series we're going to take an ad hoc approach on DirectX 12, so basically we're going to write a minimal but sufficient implementation to write a framework for like DirectX 12 exploring stuff with rendering, and yeah, we want to have it all in the one simple framework. Now what we have done in the last video is we have created ourselves a SwapChain. The SwapChain lives inside the window, and as long as the window is not closing, we're going to do a bit of window updating. We have a bit of a framework that's already ready to execute some comments on the GPU, and then we present our frame that we have just rendered, or not in this case, to the user. Now down here, when the loop is done, we do some flushing to make sure that all our GPU operation has completed on the SwapChain. Then we can destroy it and everything is going to be shut down in the regular order. Now what this is resulting in is a window with a black buffer in here. So if I start that, let's run it. I'm currently running it in release. You're going to see in a second why I'm doing it. We're going to get a black window that we can move around, and we can resize it. Previously, when we did not have the SwapChain, if you would resize it, it would not update. So it would basically show some odd data in here. So the SwapChain is already serving it, and it seems that everything is good and that this window is ready for drawing. However, it is not, because the SwapChain has been created on a static size. The SwapChain is a very minimal thing. The SwapChain does only reflect the size that you set to it. So we defined the SwapChain to be of a width of 190/20 and a height of 1080, and it will stay that size. And if we scale it, it's going to use that scaling operation that we defined. In this case, it's stretching it, which means that the SwapChain will be always stretched to fit on our window. So always the same resolution. SwapChain is never changed, and that's what we want to fix today. We want to fix this today. We want to make sure that the SwapChain can resize itself, and we maybe also want to make sure that we can go into borderless full screen mode, but we're going to see how far we're going to get today. Now, first thing that we want to do is we want to resize the SwapChain. How can we resize the SwapChain? Well, it's actually not that hard, and we're going to get to it step by step. However, I want to do one more thing before we're going to resize the SwapChain. I actually want to show you another way that you can actually see that the SwapChain is not resizing itself. For that, we're going to use Inside Graphics. This is a graphics debugger created by NVIDIA. I can create new project, and then I can search for my application. Now, by default, it starts here in the folder for where you have installed Inside Graphics. I'm going to go to my D3D12Ez folder. Then I'm going to go into my build folder. I'm going to go into my release folder, because Inside Graphics is not compatible with debugging builds. It is compatible with debugging builds, however not with the DirectX 12 debug layer that we have enabled on our debugging builds. So we want to go into the release one, make sure that we have a release version compiled, select the executable, and then we want to launch the frame debugger. Now the frame debugger is basically a debugger that allows you to debug frames. And then I'm going to click on keep here in this case. Might want to terminate that. And you can see that we're going to get our default D3D12Ez window. The only thing that's new is that we have an overlay here. We actually have an overlay that shows our FPS and a few information that we can hit F11 for a frame capture. Now, as you can see, this has a certain size, this font. And as soon as I resize my window, you're going to see that the size is not going to change. You can see that it still stays that size. If I make it big and small, you can see that the text is going to get warped together. So you can basically see the stretching here, because this text is drawn on the SwapChain by NVIDIA. It's drawn on the SwapChain here, and the SwapChain is then scaled by DXGI to fit the window. So this is where you can basically observe that it's not working correctly. You can see it's not working correctly. The text is not going to automatically adjust based on our window size, and that's going to change as soon as we implement proper SwapChain resizing, and that's what we want to do. Now let's close it up, press OK, and let's jump into our code, maybe go to debugging builds so that we can catch any issues that might occur, and let's implement SwapChain resizing. Now, how does SwapChain resizing work? Well, SwapChain resizing is in general just one function call. There is more involved in it, and there's even more involved if we are getting to further operations later on, but in general, resizing the SwapChain is just one function call. So if I would take my SwapChain, there's a resize buffers function, and that resize buffer function resizes the buffers to a new size by having a buffer count, width, height, a format, and then also SwapChain flags. You can't see this currently. Maybe if I open it up, you should be able to see it. buffer count, width, height, format, and SwapChain flags. So resize buffer actually is doing multiple things. You can specify new buffer count, new width, new height, new format, and new SwapChain flags. So this is generally the usage here. In general, it's basically recreating the buffers. It's dropping the existing ones, recreating them based on previous set attributes with these descriptors, and the ones that are supported to change at runtime by these new values. So that's what happens behind the hood. Now, this function needs to be driven by us, and it's not as simple as calling this function. Now, what we actually want to do is we want to dynamically react to changes on our window. So in general, what happens is as soon as our window is resized, a WM size message is sent to the message proc, and this WM size message indicates that our window has a new size. Now, how do we do that? Well, we basically need to go to our window proc. This is our window proc on window message. And we basically need to catch a new event here. We catch the WM close event to set the should close. And what we now want to do is we're gonna catch the WM size event, and instead of the WM size event, we should say that we want to resize. Now, how do we resize? Well, we do it similar to what we have done here. We are not going to do the resize directly, so we're not going to do something like SwapChain resize buffers. We're not going to do it here. We're not going to do it here because resizing buffer is a bit more involved than just calling the function. I'm going to show you why it is the case. I'm going to explain why it is the case in a second. We do not want to do this directly in the message proc. We want to take ourselves that another boolean, and we want to store that we want to have a size change. So how do we do it? Well, we'll basically duplicate that one, maybe make a new section here, and then instead of should close, should resize. So we're going to take ourselves a should resize, and we're going to write it here, get should resize equals true. So that's the basic idea. We're just going to do it like that. And then, of course, we also need a way to obtain that. So we have this should close. And then let's do a should resize here. And also return should resize in here. So that's the general idea. Now we have a bit of an access to that. And now the only thing that we need to do is we need to actually implement the resizing. How do we implement that? Well, we had a new function, void resize. And the void resize function shall now resize the window. Now, how do we resize the window? Well, first we need to get the size of the window. So we can get the size of the window by retrieving the client rec. Client rec is the rectangle of the client area of the window. So get client rec, we can execute this here, and then it's going to issue it in the direct. So let's do it like that, CR for client rec. We do not need to initialize it. We basically going to check that this one succeeds, and then we're going to resize it, and then we're going to say something like CR. Okay, and now we have the new width and size in here. Let's compute them in here. The new width of the window is going to be equal to let's take CR right minus CR left. This is the new width, and bottom minus top is the new height. And what I actually want to do is I actually want to store my width and height inside of the window. I do not want to have them temporarily. I'm going to store them in here as well, because we're going to use them later on. Later on, when we start rendering, we need to have the size of the window. So I actually want to store my width 1920 by 1080. Height. We want to actually store them in here. That's just because we need it. There's actually a different way to set this. We could actually skip the get client rec and directly set them in the message proc, because the message proc actually gets some information on how big the window is. However, I don't want to do it now. I basically just want to resize it using the get client rec here, because this ensures that width and height are only updated if the SwapChain is actually resized. And that's exactly what I want. I only want to update my internal members as soon as my SwapChain is actually updated, so that the internal members are always going to reflect the state of the SwapChain, the width and the height of the SwapChain, and not the width and the height of the window, because that's what really matters in DirectX 12 and in case of rendering. It would probably also work differently. However, we Now we could run into issues. If resizing is not done on every frame or it might be delayed, then we could run into issues. So we do not want to do it. But in general, it should never, at least if you're in the current architecture, it shouldn't matter. But this is a bit cleaner. It's a bit cleaner to update width and height in the resize function. All right, so now what we have the new width and height, we can actually now call the SwapChain and tell it to resize the buffers. Now, how do we resize the buffers? Well, buffers count. We're just gonna get frame count, I think was the function. We're just gonna get the frame count. Then we're gonna use m width, m height. Then we need the format. The XGI format unknown can also be specified, not unorm unknown. The XGI format unknown basically means keep the old format. Then we need to specify these flags. I want to specify them explicitly. These are these two flags that we allow tiering and also allow mode switch. So we allowed switching the SwapChain into full screen and we allow tiering on it. So I want to issue that call and I'm not going to check the resize or the return value of resize buffers. If it fails, it's okay to fail. After that, should resize, of course, should be set to false because we just have resized our SwapChain. Now, this is the, in general, basic operation that happens on the SwapChain. So we have a resize buffers function, and we have a way to retrieve if we need to resize. And they all work together nicely. Now we just need a way to drive these functions. How can we drive them? Well, it's actually quite simple. We're just going to hop into our main and we're going to check if we need to resize. Now, I want to do resizing after the updating. So if dx window get should resize, so in case the window should resize itself, then we currently just tell our window to resize. Now, this seems a bit redundant. If we do it like that, we should have already or could have already done it into the message block. What you're gonna see in a second what the problem is. So let's run that and see how it does. Well, it starts, everything is good. Let's maybe resize our window and boom, we get our friendly exception again. Now, what exception is that? Well, actually, we already know it. We have it in here. ID3D12 resource corruption. An ID3D12 resource object, unnamed object, is referenced by GPU operation in flight on common queue, unnamed common queue object. It's not safe to finally release objects that may have GPU operations pending. This can result in application instability. So this is an exact error message that we already got when we tried to release our SwapChain before we flushed it. And that's actually the same reason. Because, well, as I have told you already, when we introduce the flushing down here, we need to flush it because it might have operations. We have two buffers, which means that we have two buffers that are referenced on the GPU or might have referenced on the GPU, because presend and all of that stuff is all done asynchronously as well. If we call presend, commands are emitted on the common queue. And there might be multiple commands that are emitted. Multiple commands to basically indicate when a finished draw operation is done. Because, well, if DirectX 12 emits a command and the signal, and then we emit something and DirectX emits another signal on it, it also knows when our work is done. And this is something that might has happened here in behind the scenes. So basically, they are putting work on the queue. They may be putting some signaling work on the queue. They maybe even wait for other resources on that queue. And we just need to make sure that we always flush it as many times as we have a buffer, because this is going to ensure that we have all work done. So what I'm going to do, long story short, just also do the flushing in here. And I'm just going to maybe add a comment so that we know what's going on. Let's maybe say process pending window messages, handle resizing, and then we begin drawing, and then basically here finish drawing and present, and down here to do draw. Now it's a bit cleaner. And now this should not give us any issues. If we run it now, resizing should more or less work. I can click it a few times and you should see we are not going to get a message again. Let's close it and let's actually verify that resizing has worked. Let's verify it by going into release, quickly hitting build so that we have a release binary available. Okay, 2 functions were new in current compilation. It's correct. 13 functions were compiled. It's all good. Let's go in here. Let's start an activity. No, cancel. I want to double click on your project. If you click on your project, you're going to have your all preset in here. Let's now launch the frame debugger and see what we got. Yeah, I know it's complaining about theme, but it really also doesn't matter. And you can already see that it's already crisper. The text is already crisper than what we had initially. It was initially already blurry. And we can even verify that it works even more by resizing the window. Now first you think it's not working because you can see it is already again stretching. But this is actually expected behavior, because if I now let go of the mouse, you can see, boom, it resizes itself. The WM size message is a message that's emitted only when sizing is finished. So if I click, it's kind of like doing begin size, and if I let go, it sends the WM size message. There's also a WM sizing message that's sent while the window is dragging. However, we don't need it. We don't need for every jitter of the mouse to resize our buffers. I'm like the kind of guy that tends to wait until sizing is done, because most of the time, yeah, somebody clicks maximize and boom, there we go. Somebody minimizes and somebody drags around. So most of the time this is sufficient. So I tend to always write my code like that, and you can see it basically works, right? It works like a charm, and I can click exit to exit out of it. However, we have one issue of our code. Why do we have an issue of our code? Let's go back to debug and let's show you what's wrong with it. Window is open, I minimize it. And we are getting warnings. We don't get errors, it's not a big issue, our application still works. However, we get a bit of an issue, and later on they could become real issues. DXGI warning, IDXGI factory resize buffers. The buffer width inferred from the output window is 0, taking 8 as a reasonable default instead. So what has actually happened now is we try to resize our buffers, and we resize our buffers to 0, because actually, if a window is minimized, the WM size message is called with values of 0 and 0, by basically telling, oh, you're right, your window is now at the size of 0 because it's not shown on the screen. And it is actually a problem if this is 0. Because basically 0 doesn't work, and now what happens is we have taken a value of 8 by default, but if I would put in a breakpoint here, and I would jump into, I haven't used them for quite a while, and if I would quickly jump into the update code, you would actually see that the, let's step in here, you can actually now see that width and height is at 0. And width and height at 0 here is a bit of a problem, because if this is 0, later on some computations would maybe become 0, and our code down the line would maybe have an issue. So basically what we have is we have a bit of a problem if our window goes to 0 or under a certain size. So long story short, we need to catch it. It's not too big of an issue, but to make a bit of a robust application, we need to check if our width and height has actually gone down to 0. Now we have multiple potential ways of checking that. But the most simplest one is to basically just clamp the value. The most simple way would be to add a bit of a clamping code inside of, where is it? Here. And width and height, a bit of SCD min. SCD min SCD max, sorry. SCD max take the maximum value out of 2, which basically ensures that we have a minimum one. However, it's a bit of a problem, because if we minimize the window and maximize it back again, we basically have the same size of the swap chain again, and then we would basically make it smaller, which might later on down the line trigger resizing of a whole different gbuffer swap or a gbuffer infrastructure, which might result in rescaling shadow maps and stuff. And we don't always want to like trigger it all down the line. So what we rather want to do is we rather want to emit that one. We rather don't want to see that we should not resize if we are not in a certain size. So basically what we want to check if that our window has not become 0. How can we check if our window becomes 0? I can make a breakpoint in here and I can show you what we're gonna have. Now, if we're gonna get this resize, we're gonna have something called lparam. It's here. Lparam indicates the width and height of the value encoded in a 64-bit integer. 32-bit for the width and 32-bit for the height, or the other way around. I don't really know what the thing is. Let's maybe remove that breakpoint here and let's just continue on a bit. Now we have our window. Let's minimize it, and you can see that this lparam, as soon as I minimize it, becomes 0. And if I maximize it again, it's going to get a valid value again. So basically, the lparam indicates the window size. If I maximize it, it changes another value. But basically, what we want to catch is we want to catch the thing where our lparam is going to be 0. That's the one that we want to prevent. We want to prevent that lparam is 0. If lparam is 0, we should not resize. How I'm going to check this, it's actually quite simple. We're just gonna take it out, and I want to do a quick check, and I want to check that lparam is valid, and only if lparam is valid I want to set that. Now let's make another breakpoint so that we can see when we are now getting into a resize. So now you can see we're going to get an initial resize. This is because our creation window size with all of these borders does not really match HD, so we're actually going to have always one resize. If I minimize it, we are not going to get a resize. However, if I maximize it, we are going to get one. I want to also prevent that. How can I prevent that? Well, basically what I need to do is I need to do another checking. Basically, what we can do is we can get a hybrid out of that lparam, and I want to basically check that it's not equal to width. I think it's the hybrid is the width. What? Yeah, because get width. We want to check that this one, they are not equal, and that the lowered is also not equal m height. However, we need to chain them a bit differently. lparam needs to be valid, and we need to have a condition not equal width or not equal height. This is the condition that we need to have. One or combined with an and. This is kind of like the idea. And now we should just hit one resize. If I minimize it, it should not hit. And if I maximize, it hits, because of course I made it the other way around. So this is the height. And this is the width. Let's do it like that. And let's rerun it. Now it should basically indicate that everything is good. We have one resize. And if I now minimize it, it should be good. And if I maximize it, it should also be good. Now just the normal resize should hit the actual breakpoint. Now we can remove it, and now we basically have added a bit of infrastructure code around so that everything is good. Now this basically gives us a black window that actually resizes according to the size, or actually a swap chain that follows the size of the client area of our black window. It's not a big of a deal. Just a few lines of code, probably way too less lines of code for the amount of time that is in the video. However, that's how resizing a swap chain works. And I said that I want to also try out full screen. However, I think it's not a good idea to do it now. I mean, full screen isn't that hard to do, but I think it's still good to maybe put in a different video to not make the videos too long, because I would still probably take like 10 to 15 minutes to explain it, because I tend to over-complicate and over-explain stuff. But it's also, I think, good so that you understand how it works and how you do it and how it all runs behind the scenes. But I think it's okay for now. We have a resizable window with a resizable swap chain, and that's actually good, and that's actually a quite complicated piece of code and quite some work that we have done. And I think it's good, because that's what you need. You need to have that in case you want to write an application, because people tend to have different sizes of monitors. I used to, for like a coding challenge, write an application that did not resize, and basically it took me like a half an hour to make it resizable. I mean, I virtually didn't resize behind the scenes and did apply some scaling to the mouse position to basically handle HD resolution. But it's darn simple to get your applications to fit on your customer's monitor. So do it. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and have a nice day. Bye.